fantastic race. So I want to welcome everybody who's here with us tonight, and I think it's time to get this going. So Alexa, if you can give me the next slide, that would be great. So I really have the great privilege, one, to introduce Troy Jacobson. If you don't know Troy, you should know Troy. I've known Troy now for probably close to 20 years. And Troy is a former pro triathlete who's had an incredible career, both racing as well as in his coaching endeavors and creating a very unique and one-of-a-kind cycling series called Spinnerbles that I both used as an athlete, co-produced some videos with him, and Troy's been a long-standing friend, business partner, and coach, and I can only tell you that we are so honored to have him here tonight. So Troy, thanks for joining us. And just next slide, Alexa. And just 2 seconds about me. I've been in the triathlon world for a good long time, done many endurance racings. I'm a board-certified orthopedic surgeon, and I've seen a lot of the athletes with the New York City Triathlon as well as around the Manhattan area. I am the medical director for the race, so you will see me this year both racing as well as at the finish line. Hopefully you won't stop and see us at the finish line, but know that we're always available for you. So let's continue to the next slide. So the goals for tonight's webinar are essentially, Troy's going to talk to you about some of the training aspects of the race. I'm going to talk to you about potential injuries that you might have, hopefully not, as of yet, but might incur during your training. We'll talk about some race logistics and get some great tips from Troy in terms of his racing career, and then leave, obviously, a great amount of time for your questions and answers. Next slide. So again, with this year's race, again, you should know the date. It's July 24th, coming up fairly soon. Again, this is an Olympic distance tri. So you know that the average time of finish is approximately 3 to 4 hours. We do have pros that finish in under 2 hours, depending upon sometimes the weather and the currents of the swim. And then we do have our finishers that go upwards of 5 and 6 hours. So there's a great number of people and a great span of people that finish this race. It's a closed course, so if you've not done this race before, there are no cars. It's an amazing, unique experience, riding up the Henry Hudson on the west side and running right through Central Park. So it's really a great experience for everybody. This is a very large race. There's about 4,000 participants. But what's even better about that is that there's about 1,200 volunteers that will be lined up along the course to help you in finishing your goal. The other really big thing that I'm responsible for is the medical team. There's approximately 100 of us that comprise of both physicians, nurses, physicians assistants, podiatrists, and massage therapists. We've basically got everything to take care of most, if not all, of your needs. There will be nutrition on the course, and I think Alexa can speak to that a little bit afterwards in terms of drink and some other nutritional supplements. And again, the medical support is really there to kind of keep you safe as you proceed during the race and race day event. Next slide. So again, what you need to know, it's one race, it's 3 separate events, and you really basically have about 15 weeks till race day. So for some of you, this is going to be sort of the peak training period of time. But again, my always dictum in these races is be prepared to change your plan. What you might think is going to happen, it could be weather, not in your control, but always be prepared. And I think Troy and I can give you, if there are some questions about that, how you might accommodate flat tire, dropping your water bottle, things like that do happen. So be prepared when it comes to that. There's obviously, as you can see from the slide, there are pre-race briefings that they will take you through every inch of the course. So you should be well abreast and understood about what you're about to go through, and that will take place at the day before at the expo. Next slide. So I'm going to leave this up to my great friend Troy to give you some of the basics and where you should be at this point in time where you should be for the next 15 weeks. So, Troy, why don't you go ahead and take it.
All right, Mark. Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here again with Dr. Klion and Alexa and everyone else on the call. At Lifetime, my role is to manage our coaches throughout the company. We have over 120 clubs throughout the United States, and in roughly 50% of those clubs, we have active triathlon training programs, including a few in our New York or upper Northeast market. So some of you may have the opportunity to engage in some of those great programs. As Mark had mentioned, I've got a long history in the sport as an athlete and as a coach, and it's just a wonderful sport. I love it, and I think it's great for everyone to participate in. So today I want to talk about some of the principles of training, and just at a real high level, just the fundamentals. We don't have a lot of time. This could be a week-long course if we wanted it to be, but we're going to condense it into about 20 minutes. So we're going to buzz right through this stuff. And, of course, you can ask questions at the end, and certainly if you have any questions after, please feel free to email me, and I'll be more than happy to answer. And my email address, I'll type it into the chat area as well, is tjacobson@lifetimefitness.com, and our website is lifetimeendurance.com. So let's get into our deck here, and we'll go into this first slide. So goal setting, of course, is very important. I'm going to assume that a lot of folks on the call are what I would consider beginner to intermediate, so 0 to perhaps 2 years of experience. And again, so we'll speak at a high level. But it's really important to lay out your schedule, your race schedule for the season, and to look at your races as short-term and long-term goals. And I always tell my athletes, hey, look, let's have a long-term vision for your participation in the sport. Let's look at 3 years down the road. Where you want to be 3 years down the road, and how are we going to get you there? And then we work back. So in this case, we're talking about a relatively short-term goal and getting ready for the New York City Tri, being only about 15 weeks away. My hope is you've been training and you're getting prepared. By no means should you be in the peak of your training cycle necessarily, but you should have a nice level of conditioning and be practicing the swimming, the cycling, and the running in preparation for the event. And certainly for next year, when you sign up for the New York City Tri, you can take it up a notch. So perhaps that's your long-term goal. Get ready for the event again next year. And for some of you, it may be graduating to longer course triathlons. And Lifetime Fitness has a partnership with Ironman, so we do have a relationship with the Ironman 70.3 series as well as the Ironman series. And what a great progression to have an Olympic distance race in your progression as you prepare for a longer course triathlon. So one thing that I believe every athlete should have is a personal philosophy, meaning how does triathlon training and racing fit into your life? And it's really important to identify that and to define that, because from experience as a coach, I've seen triathlon take people's lives over, and I really try to stress having proper perspective and keeping the sport in its proper place. And again, what do you want to achieve in the sport? And that goes back to our discussion on long and short-term goals. And then ask yourself, why do you train and why do you race? What are your reasons for getting out there, getting up early in the morning and swimming, training later in the evening, the sacrifices that you make, the sacrifices that your family makes for you to race? You have to really define that. And everyone races for a different reason, but the objective here is to define your own personal philosophy for training and racing. Next slide, please. Training plan development, really important. All of you should be following a training plan. It's best to follow a program that's structured and has purpose rather than one that's really random. You can finish a triathlon if you train randomly, but you're not going to get the best bang for the buck. You're not going to maximize your training time and effort, and that's really important. So one thing you want to look at is how much time each week do you have available to actually train? And you need to calculate that and be honest and realistic. Is it 8 hours a week? Is it 10 hours a week? And don't forget to factor in your travel time and your preparation time. You get to the pool, by the time you go in the locker room, change your clothes, put on your swimsuit, hop in the water, finish up your workout, hop out. What is that? It's probably an hour to an hour and 15 minutes. So keep all those factors in play and try to calculate how much time you have available to train each week. I can tell you that most triathletes will be training between 8 and 12 hours per week, and I think that's a good benchmark to hit, 8 to 12 for the Olympic distance. As you get more serious and more competitive, that time period might go up. And I've seen successful age group athletes train upwards of 15 to 20 hours a week for the Olympic distance. So what are we working with as a coach or as an athlete? Well, first of all, I believe all athletes should be somewhat self-coached. You should have a basic knowledge, a fundamental knowledge of what makes you tick, you know, how you respond to training, what training is best for you. The things we deal with, the ingredients are intensity, duration, and frequency. And I say coaches are like a cook in the kitchen. We all have the same ingredients. It's how we mix them up to make that special dish that really counts. And triathlon training and coaching an athlete and coaching yourself is all an experiment of one. Everybody responds to training in a different way. And our job as a coach, your job as an athlete, is to figure out through a series of trial and error what makes the most sense for you, how you respond to training most effectively and most efficiently. My last point there, my last bullet, intuitive training and developing a keen sense of self-awareness is key and critical for every athlete, regardless of their level and ability. And you'll see this with elite athletes. They develop an incredible sense of self-awareness, and they train intuitively. So what that means is if on your training schedule you have an interval run day, like a track workout or a hard run day, and you don't feel like it, you know yourself well enough that you know you need to take it easy that day. That is developing training intuition, and that's something that we should all strive to do. So listen to your body. Next slide, please. So here we're still talking about training plan development, but I want to talk about mental toughness. It's really something that's important for every triathlete because, let's face it, triathlon is a challenging sport. It's difficult. It hurts. You know, let's face it, when you're out there and you're pushing yourself and it's a hot, humid day, it's gonna be uncomfortable out there. So I think it's really important to develop this ability to tolerate discomfort. And so you can do that by practicing, doing your interval work and doing the training that is uncomfortable and just learning to accept it. Acceptance of that discomfort is part of the game that we play as triathletes. You know, when you're out there in a race, whether it's a 10K, a 5K, or an Ironman distance triathlon, and you feel like you need to slow down, you feel like you need to quit, everybody goes through that, just so you know. The most elite athletes feel like they want to quit at some point during the race, but they don't. The truth of the matter is when you feel like you want to quit, you're pushing to your limit, you actually have 60% more to go. That's a Navy SEAL rule. You may have heard that before. You're only at 40% of your max when you feel like you want to quit. Your body can go much further. So developing that sense of mental toughness is really important if you want to race effectively. Periodization. This is a concept that we use. Periodization is just essentially mixing the training focus up during the course of a year, during the course of an annual training cycle, so that you peak at the right time. And for many of you, the New York City Tri may in fact be your A race, you know, the most important race on your calendar. And if that's the case, your training should be set up in a way that you actually reach towards your peak form, your best ability on that race day. So periodization helps athletes do that. It also helps athletes continually progress, avoids stagnation and plateau, and also helps avoid injury, which Dr. Klion will talk a little bit more about later. Blocks of training defined. So we have these microcycles, which could be considered a weekly cycle in your training program, monthly, and then, of course, our seasonal and annual. You want to look at your training calendar and basically develop or build your training schedule around your race calendar. That's why I always encourage my athletes to do that well in advance. In fact, I usually sit down with them the year prior to the season starting, so in October, November, and say, okay, what are we doing for next year? Let's lay out the schedule. And if your A race is going to be Ironman Lake Placid, for example, where are we going to fit the New York City Tri into this calendar? Or better yet, If it's a later Ironman, how is the New York City Tri going to fit into the calendar? And how are we going to set up your training progression so that it makes the most sense and we move from one race to the next? Next slide, please. So again, we talked about tapering and peaking, and this is just a really important concept I just want to touch on once again. As you prepare for the New York City Tri, and whether you're following a training program or not, which I hope you are, you will notice that towards the end of the training program, as you approach race day, you're going to see a gradual decrease in training volume and probably a decrease in intensity, but you'll still maintain some level of intensity. And what that's called, it's called a taper. And what a taper does is it brings your body around to its peak form. You feel rested and sharp, meaning you feel like you're really ready to go and your body's at a point where it's going to perform at its highest potential level. And that's what you want to do. And tapering and peaking is both an art and a science. Race strategy and other considerations. So let's talk a little bit about this, and this is really important too, because your race strategy is something you should develop well before you actually race and practice in training, which is a key thing as well. Everything you do on race day should be practiced in training. That includes your nutrition, it includes your pacing, your equipment needs, everything. And let's face it, triathlon is a very technical sport, especially when it comes to the bike. I mean, there are a lot of moving parts in the bike, and the eventuality of having a mechanical issue is very high. So you want to make sure that your bike is really dialed in. As you do prepare for your race, you want to make sure that all of your equipment's dialed in. You have the proper fit. You're using the proper equipment. This even goes down to the apparel that you wear. Don't buy the new tri-kit the day before your race and wear it on race day. It's just not a good idea. Again, you don't want to do anything that's brand new on race day. Make sure you're doing it well in advance. Pacing. Pacing is so important. Pacing is I can't even stress the importance of it, because we all have a certain number of matches in our match book in which to burn. And one of the most common mistakes that newer athletes make is they go out too hard and they burn their matches too quickly. And what happens is they end up walking at the end of the race. They end up having an overall time or an overall experience that isn't optimized because they burnt their matches too quickly. It really takes experience to learn how to burn your matches properly. But I'll tell you this right now, if you go out hard, you're always going to fail towards the end. That's just a truth. You need to go out when you start any race, go out at a point where you feel somewhat comfortable. And if you do that, then you can build into your pace, get into your rhythm, build your tempo, and maintain that. Remember, triathlon is a time trial event. You need to maintain a steady effort throughout the entire race. That's how you're going to race most effectively and have your best overall time. Nutrition, another really important strategy. For any event that lasts over 2 hours, and most of us on this call will be over 2 hours for this race, we want to make sure we're maximizing our nutrition. And that means practicing. Once again, it means practicing. So, for example, when you're out there swimming, you are sweating. In fact, you're sweating a lot. Don't forget the fact that you need to hydrate really well almost immediately when you get on that bike, because some of you will be out there for 25, 30, 40 minutes swimming at a high level of intensity, and by doing so, you're actually losing a significant amount of fluid. And if you lose 2% of fluid in terms of your overall body weight, that significantly decreases your performance. So you want to make sure that you're hydrating very effectively. In terms of calories, that's really important as well. Many of you will be on that course for 3 hours, even more. So you need to consume some calories during the race. And most important, in my opinion, is on the bike. The bike sets up your run. Not only that, not only will the pacing on the bike set up your run. In other words, if you ride smart, you pace yourself properly on the bike, you'll have good legs in which to run well off the bike, which is key to any triathlete's success. The same goes for nutrition. If you're taking in your calories on a measured level, a measured basis, perhaps every 20 to 30 minutes, and you're doing this, you're going to have the energy to run well off the bike. Another important thing is while you're on the bike, your digestive system is in much better shape than it is on the run. So if you try to play catch-up in the sport of triathlon, you're never going to win, okay? You want to make sure that you're preemptive, that you're always working on your hydration and nutrition before you start having difficulty. Once you start having difficulty, you can always recover, but you'll always be better off being preemptive, okay? So keep that in mind. And let's talk a little bit about race week preparation. So we have here 7 days, 48 hours, and 24 hours. That last week leading up to race day is really key and critical to your success on race day. I've seen athletes who say, okay, well, race is coming up, I have 7 days, I'm going to start training more. I'm going to cram fitness, just like I did in college, cram for that big exam. It doesn't work that way when it comes to training for triathlon. In fact, at that point, the water is under the bridge, so to speak. So you want to make sure that you are, in that last week, really focusing on your recovery and being fresh and getting sharp for race day. So what I recommend is if you have work obligations, any kind of stressor that's perhaps that you know about, you're aware of, try to get it done the week before race week or put it off till after the race. So that race week you can sort of relax your mind as well as your body. So what that means is every night of race week, try to get that 7 or 8 hours of sleep. I know that's hard for a lot of us, but try to do your best. If you can sit down, sit down. Don't stand up, walk around. That just creates unnecessary fatigue. So rest and recover as much as you can. You're still going to be training a little bit. Keep in mind, you want to stay sharp, okay? There's a lot of physiological things that happen when you just take off entirely. In fact, you can actually lose fitness. It's called deconditioning. You can lose VO2 max, your capabilities. And so you want to make sure that you're doing some training and doing a little bit of intensity in your training and staying nice and sharp before the race. But it's also a really good time to work on your mental strategy, to do your visualization. Think about the race. Think about what you're going to do in transition. Think about the swim start. Think about your rhythm. Think about your stroke. Go through the race in your mind's eye. Do that the week before the race, and you'll have a great race experience. As you approach your 48 hours before race day, it's still the same, but you're just going to ramp up the rest factor. Again, try to stay off your feet, relax more. If you can take a nap, that would be fantastic in that last 48 hours, and take care of your nutrition. If it's going to be a hot day, I usually tell my athletes to make sure that you're hydrating well and maybe have a little bit of additional sodium in your diet. Use that salt shaker a little bit, not a lot, but just a little bit. I even tell my athletes to have a can of V8 juice or some kind of high sodium drink or even soups the week prior to the race, just to load their sodium a little bit for a hot, humid race. But 48 hours, try to get a really good night's sleep 2 nights before race day, because I tell you what, the night before race day or the night of the race, you will not be sleeping a whole lot. But that's okay. Some people get really worried about not being able to sleep the night of the race, but the truth is research shows that it doesn't really matter a whole lot. It's not going to really affect your performance that much, if at all. It's more important to rest well the week before the race, especially 2 nights before the race. The other thing I want to mention really quickly is 24 hours. Well, eat so that you're comfortable, but don't overeat. In the old days, we used to carbo load. I know Dr. Klion remembers this. You used to have your carbo loading parties where you would basically, the night before the race, eat as much pasta as you possibly could at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night for a 7 a.m. race start. That always seemed like a bad idea. As it turns out, it was. But you don't want to overeat, but you just want to make sure that you're comfortable and don't change anything. Don't start eating foods you're not used to eating anyway, okay? Really important. And then, of course, the morning of the race, wake up 2 hours or more. I usually say wake up 3 hours before the race starts. You want your body to be prepared. You want your engine revving, so to speak, and have a light breakfast, roughly an hour and a half before the race start, so that your muscle glycogen stores are up and you're not in a fasted state when the gun goes off. That's really important, so you have a high energy level during the race itself. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, well, so that was my piece, and certainly I will jump back in towards the end as we get back into the training. So I'm going to hand it off to Mark now.
Great, Troy. That was excellent. I mean, that really is a culmination of your life as both as an athlete and as a coach, and you really gave basically the dictum that I have lived with over the last many years in many races, and really brought up some great points that hopefully I'll highlight also as I talk about injuries. So next slide, Alexa, please. So injury prevention, I always kind of use this slide, what if I'm injured? Hopefully none of you are. It happens to all of us. They're not injuries that are an act of God. It happens. You do it to yourself. And it really indicates that, the athlete's reached a breakdown point. You have to think of our body, which includes all of our tissues, muscle, tendons, ligaments, and even bone, as a rope. We're made of collagen. 70% of our body by dry weight is made of collagen. It's a string-like substance that if you pull on it, you stretch it, you crush it, eventually it's going to break. We do have normal responses to stress. There's the microscopic injury, and the body's able to heal that. And we're unaware of those healing responses. But when we get to a certain point where we cannot sustain that normal process with repeated kind of sub-microscopic injuries, we start to develop scar tissue, and that becomes the nidus of an injury. You have to think about this collagen as a coat hanger, if you want to use that simple analogy. It's a very strong substance. Metal is very strong. But if you apply a bending stress to it, you start to play with it, eventually it's going to break. And that's what happens in terms of fatigue injuries. But the good thing, though, is that all of these injuries are curable if they're caught early. Next slide. So injury recognition, when it comes to what I see mostly with overuse injuries, is that it's hard to recognize when these injuries occur. First of all, we're all bad patients, myself included. We always have a desire to push through. You've got a goal. Troy said, you've got your A race July 24th, and something suddenly pops up. You're training with a group of friends, and they say, come on, you can get through this. And we say, yeah, we can. And you start to push through this. You don't see any particular swelling or bruising that you might see in a traumatic injury. It just hurts. But, we desire and we try and push through, and that's not always the best advice. So we learn, as Troy pointed out, experience, self-awareness, and maturity are really, truly our best friends when it comes to injury recognition. So if something's not feeling right, you have to, as I would say, raise up the white flag and surrender that day. If you're not feeling it and you're having discomfort, it's time to back off and actually do something about it. Next slide, please. So we always take positive actions. Any athlete hates to hear it. If it hurts, don't do it. That's what my more senior partners in my group would probably say. I don't like to say that. I would say if it hurts, let's find a way, to make it not hurt. So there are lots of alternatives, especially from a triathlon perspective, especially with a lower extremity injury. You can always move to swimming. You can always improve on your swimming. You can always do something else. Elliptical train or other devices that we can use out there will help us cross-train and maintain some of this cardiovascular fitness that we're in desire of achieving. There is some aspect of good pain, as you might say, versus bad pain. What is good pain? Well, there's that good pain, as Troy mentioned, the desire to quit. God, this hurts. I don't love this. I always use the motto, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional, and that's a mental aspect. But there is bad pain that's out there, and that's pain that, when you're doing something, it really does hurt with every repetitive motion, and it doesn't seem to go away. Good pain might be, I ran hard yesterday, and I'm going to go for another run tomorrow, and gee, my knee hurts a little bit, but you know what, 20 minutes into the run kind of goes away. I think that's acceptable, but that's the first warning sign that maybe something's brewing. But that's in difference to those types of painful episodes where I take every step and it hurts and it doesn't go away. So when you have that bad pain, again, that is, in essence, you need to stop what you're doing and address what's there. We talk about modifying activity. Again, go to swimming, go to an elliptical trainer. But I think when you look at it, and as Troy pointed out, going through your training program, look at that logbook. Find out when your training patterns changed. Again, I think in this period of time, in this periodization, you're going to start to go into maybe a peak training cycle. And this is where you really have to be careful because intensity goes up, volume might go up. And you have to be careful through these times not to expose your body to too much stress. We always ask for advice. You're not alone. Troy's always available. I'm always available through my email. But there's other athletes who have probably suffered the same injuries that you're going through. So always ask someone with respect to this so you can take a positive action and minimize your downtime with respect to training. So I always say treat the cause, not the effect. You know, the acronym of RICE, rest, ice, compression, elevation is always good, and it really is more applicable to traumatic injuries. I always like to use the modification for that of RR, relative rest. I just mentioned modifying your activities. If there's something that you can do that does not seem to bother that injury, then you're fine. And that's a great adaptive mechanism to continue your fitness training. So that's very helpful. Ice is always important, especially when it comes time to pain. Ice is probably one of the best analgesic agents that are out there. Please be careful when applying ice in terms of only doing it for short periods of time, and that can run anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes, and you can cycle that every hour, 2 hours. I have seen individuals that come into my office actually with second-degree burns because they say, you know, my knee was bothering me and I fell asleep with a pack of ice on, and it's not just a bag of ice cubes which eventually melt, it's one of these pre-made packages. And next thing you know, they've got a second-degree burn on their extremity. So please be careful when it comes to that. Compression is helpful when there's some aspect of swelling and elevation, obviously accompanied by swelling. So that's more from a traumatic standpoint, but certainly the relative rest and ice is always helpful when there is an ache or a discomfort. We always talk about equipment issues, and I think there's you know, one specific issue, and that's shoe wear. You can now see that I've been doing the New York City Triathlon medical team for approximately 10 years because that's a pair of sneakers that's been long retired with a date written on it. I date my sneakers so that I know how many miles I put on it, and I roughly go about 300 to 400 miles, you know, on an individual pair of sneakers. Remember that the undersurface of the sneaker is made of pretty much vulcanized rubber, no different than a Michelin tire, and that's usually not what wears out. It's the midsole substance that becomes compressed and hardens. And then there's a greater transfer of stress from the ground to your joints, and that's where we often see some people's injuries pop up. Obviously, other equipment that's important is your bicycle. If you've never had a bike fit, that's something that every triathlete who is endeavoring to advance themselves in the sport is essential from a performance standpoint, but also from an injury standpoint. Poor bike position can lead to a multitude of injuries, mostly neck and lower back pain, but certainly lower extremity injuries can occur from bad bike positioning. And obviously, you look at swimming, technique is everything. That's your one equipment, although there are devices of training in a pool that include fins, that include paddles, pull buoys. My one caution is with swim paddles is that they put an undue force onto your upper extremities. So please be careful when you're considering, you know, swimming with paddles. Training programs, I think Troy went over this incredibly well, and that everybody should be on a training program. Dietary considerations, you know, everybody goes into sports for a variety of reasons, some for performance, some for weight loss. It can be a dangerous situation when you're training and you're not actually bringing in the calories that you're burning off. Yes, it's nice to lose weight, but you also want to maintain a nutritional balance so that you're actually getting in the nutrients that you need for a healthy body. A lot of those nutrients are essential to our healing processes that occur in the body. And that brings up the subject of supplements. What are good and bad supplements? I'm not a huge advocate of this, but certainly during peak training times, I think taking a standard multivitamin is very beneficial. You know that you're taking too much of any one component when your urine changes color, because normally that means that your body cannot process that, and it's just, you know, essentially peeing it out. So be careful when it comes to that, and certainly when you're taking any type of a supplement, hydration is important and to allow your body to absorb this. From my perspective, really it's recovery. Recovery, recovery, recovery. This is the one lesson that you learn through maturity and self-awareness. There's physical recovery, there's mental recovery, and then there's actually some aspect of biologic recovery. Physical is just overall feeling tired and beaten up, and it's good to take a day off, and that's programmed into your schedule. Mental, same thing that Troy mentioned is that, you wake up one morning and you just don't have it. All your friends are running 400s, and you feel like, I can't do this. That's fine. You don't need to. But really an important aspect of this is immune function. When you recover, when you sleep, that is when your body is going through its reparative mechanisms. Cortisol, growth hormone, are some at the peak levels during this period of time. And when you lose sleep, these cortisol and growth hormone levels seem to be unregulated and don't cycle through their normal patterns, and that will lead to the beginning portions of breakdown. So when we talk about sleep, everybody's different. And I think one measure of sleep and one measure of recovery that everybody can utilize is getting your resting heart rate in the morning. Upon waking up and really not moving, it's always good gauge just to check your resting heart rate level. And in doing so, you can actually determine whether or not you're being overtrained. If your body's working harder than it should, your resting heart rate will be elevated. It could be 5 beats, it could be 10 beats. And obviously there's some variation to that. But what we do see, certainly prior to becoming ill, prior to getting a cold, which often accompanies overtraining, is that your resting heart rate goes up. So every morning I do gauge my resting heart rate, and that is also a gauge in which I will tell myself whether I'm actually fit to undergo the rigors of whatever training I'm doing and my schedule. And if it's not in line with what I think I can do, then I'll use that as a measure to say, you know what, this is maybe a day off, or maybe I adjust my workout. Next slide. So treat thyself, because you're really the only one that can take care of this. Me as an orthopedic surgeon, I'm happy to help guide you how to get better, but most of these overuse injuries really don't need my expertise. Sometimes I feel like a psychiatrist when I see some of these patients, because they said to me, I've raised $2,000 to run this race and now I can't, and I have to talk to them off the wall a little bit. But basically, it's really you that needs to be empowered, and you have the mechanisms to do that. We talked about activity modification, we talked about application of ice, and we talked about elevation. Sleep is important, and eat to recover. So getting that caloric intake is extremely important. I often put this slide in, and Troy addressed this, the missed workout syndrome. So yes, I'm not feeling well, and I had to run my 8 mile. Well, I can't do it, so you know what? Tomorrow, I'm going to try and double my workout so that I can catch up. That is, in essence, the key to failure. Missing one workout in a broad training program really is nothing. It's inconsequential. There's never one sentinel workout that's going to make or break your race. So if there happens to be a period of time that you've got a little bit of an ankle issue that's going on and you miss a workout or you change what that workout is, just go ahead with your program. Don't think about this. Don't worry about this. It's just a small blip in everybody's training schedule. This is, you're definitely not alone when it comes to this. Next slide. So let's talk about some race logistics. And again, just as a reminder for some of the people that might not have been in the beginning, if there are questions, you can use the chat function to post a question, and we'll leave some time at the end of this. So let's go through some race logistics. Next slide. So the swim. Again, this is a 1.5 kilometer swim. If you haven't had the opportunity and the joy of swimming this swim, it's got one of the strongest currents you'll ever imagine. Some of the best times are posted by the average athletes, including myself, with respect to this swim. You can literally, as someone once said, be a bag of potato chips and actually swim the fastest swim that you could possibly be and just float down the water. So it's a great swim, it's an enjoyable swim, and it's a great preparation, as Troy talked about in terms of pacing. This is not the place to try and make up 5 seconds. You are going to make up 5 seconds no matter what you do. It's a wetsuit, usually legal swim, and it's important to understand, and we'll talk in a second or so, that from the transition area to the start of the swim is essentially 1.5 kilometer walk. I believe, and Alexa can chime in on this, I believe there are pedicabs potentially that will bring racers to the start of the swim. Is that true, Alexa?
That is actually just following the race. So they'll bring up athletes from the finish line back to transition to pick up their bikes, but everyone will be required to walk.
Oh, sorry, I thought there might be a change. Sorry about that, guys. But so anyway, so you're going to need to walk. So you need to plan appropriately in terms of time, and understand that that's, almost a mile walk that if you place your wetsuit on, you're going to become incredibly dehydrated. So plan accordingly that you walk up there early, holding onto your wetsuit. You plan accordingly that you've got maybe a goo in hand and a good old water bottle so that you can actually hydrate as you get up to the start line. There's plenty of porta-johns at the top, and one suggestion along those lines is to address a little bit about the carbo loading issue, is that your transit time, your gastrointestinal transit time is anywhere from 12 to 18 hours. So whatever you've had 12 to 18 hours before race morning, expect that to want to come out. So although the porta-johns are very well equipped with toilet paper, it might behoove you to bring your own special package of toilet paper with you. But anyway, so you'll walk up there, again, lubrication. If you've not been in your wetsuit, you really need to lubricate this. There's lots of different substances out there, Body Glide, but that will help decrease any irritation that you might have, and shoes. Although the organizers of the race do an incredible job of sweeping the concrete surface that you'll be walking up, you should have shoes on so that we don't have to address that at the start line, which we do staff with podiatrists for any cuts or any other injuries to the feet at that time. And then the good thing about this start is that it's a time trial start. So it's not a mass start as it used to be. It's 15 athletes every 20 seconds, and it allows for an incredible amount of spacing. And from my perspective on this start, if you are afraid to get into that water, when the whistle blows and they say go, count 1 1,000, 2 1,000, and then get in the water, and you will not be in the melee of the 15 people that have just jumped in with you. Next slide. And this just shows, and this you'll get in your race packet, with on the left-hand side where the pontoon is, up by the tennis courts on the west side, and the swim course is south along the Hudson River. There is no practice swimming at all, because once you've gotten into the water, you're not going to be able to get out and back to the dock. It is an incredibly well-staffed, protected swim in that there will be boats, there will be people on surfboards and kayaks, there will be spotters along the wall, so feel incredibly safe when you're swimming along the seawall. Troy, I'll ask if there's any tidbits in terms of your preparation in swim starts.
Yeah, can you hear me, Mark?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so, we didn't address warming up, so I know you can't get in the water beforehand. That's always ideal. And normally, you never want to start any kind of training session cold. I think the walk to the swim is actually a real benefit to the athletes because, believe it or not, that does serve as a little bit of a warm-up. So that's good. The only thing I would suggest is prior to your swim start that you do a little bit of dry land work just to get some blood flow to your upper body. I actually would recommend to practice your swim stroke and your timing. A little bit of dry land swim simulation would be a good idea. And to do some just upper body stretches, a little bit of dynamic work, back slaps as Michael Phelps does with his warm-ups prior to his swims. You've probably seen that. But anything you can do to just get the upper body moving and feel warm prior to the start, I think is really effective. And as we both alluded to and mentioned, the whole analogy with burning matches, it's really important to not sprint the first part of the swim. You want to go out at a pace that you feel is comfortable, maybe a little bit aggressive, but you just don't want to sprint because that puts you in a deficit and that can really affect the rest of your swim.
Excellent. And again, I will be on a bicycle, and I'm going to be looking at everybody who has joined this webinar and hopefully knowing that they all have a water bottle on hand because, again, depending on the late July weather, it's going to be hot, it's going to be humid, and in that mile walk, although, as Troy said, you'll be warmed up, you're definitely going to start sweating. And the minute that wetsuit goes on, you're going to sweat even more. So this is the optimum time to start your race off on a nutrition and hydration upswing. Next slide. So the bike, you'll get out of the water, you'll go into one of two transition zones. The most important aspect from my perspective as one of the medical advisors is that you put your helmet on. And this is obviously a rule that you need to abide by, that should be your first thing through transition is put your helmet on and buckle it. It will disqualify you if you leave transition zone without your helmet and without it buckled. And obviously from a safety standpoint, it's incredibly important. You should go to, when you drop your bike off, and get a good appraisal of what you have to do to get out of transition. There's a very short, steep hill that you need to get up to onto the west side highway. And in that zone from leaving transition to the point of getting on the west side highway is a no-race zone, okay? So we ask that you do not pass anybody. You will not win a race. You will not lose the race. This is a safety zone. It's a very active place with swimmers coming in, going out, runners coming in, going out, that you abide by strict caution, and they will emphasize this at your meetings, that this is a no-race zone. The race begins when you get on the west side highway. But what's equally important is that you put yourself into the right gearing. The right gearing, because you've got a steep hill, should be on the front ring, it should be small, and on the back cog, it should be big. This gives you the easiest power ratio, and it allows you to get up this short, steep climb. The course terrain is actually a great course. It's a beautiful section of road, and as you see on the picture on the right, exit 14 for the George Washington Bridge, this is the beginning of the hilly section. So this is approximately 2 to 4 miles up the road, and when you start to climb towards the GW, it gets to be a little windy and a little hilly, and it's a fun overall course. Again, as Troy mentioned, nutrition and hydration, this is everything. This will set up the run. This will make or break your race. So be prepared to have this set up. And then we'll go through transition. So let's go to the next slide. This is the bike course itself. It's up on the West Side Highway going to what's called the Mosholu Parkway. There's a little bit of a climb to the turnaround point, and then a very fast descent back up another hill, and then kind of a semi-hilly pass back all the way down the West Side Highway, all the way down to 57th Street, where there's another turnaround, a bit of an ascent, and then back to 79th Street, where you will get off. And again, as you get off the West Side Highway, it is a no-race zone because there'll be a short, steep descent, which will take you into the transition areas. And again, we ask of you that you dismount when you're supposed to dismount. You keep your helmet on till you have racked your bike. If you take off your helmet, unbuckle your helmet, the officials there will actually disqualify you. Next slide. These are the transition zones. Again, the take-home message of this is if you look at all the dotted lines that encircle these transition zones, imagine 4,000 people trying to get through this main transition area. It's a very hectic place. There will be people guiding you, but please take extreme caution when you pass through these zones. There will be medical tents that will be at the upper end of the red transition area and at the bottom of the yellow transition area. So know that when you have a problem, that we will be available at those locations. Next slide. And Troy, any other comments about the bike?
Sorry about that. I took myself off mute there. Yeah, so just one more quick thing. So pacing, again, is just so critical, and we talked about that earlier. I want to mention that towards the end of the bike, in the last, say, 10 or 15 minutes, I suggest that you change your strategy a little bit with the way you pedal. And by that I mean increase your cadence a little bit so you start spinning your legs out and prepare yourself for the run. I also suggest that you stand up a little bit on your bike and stretch out your hamstrings and your lower back so that transition to the run is a little bit easier. So, you know, whatever it may in that roughly last 10 or 15 minutes of the bike leg, spin a little bit easier, get that cadence up, let the legs start recovering a little bit from your harder effort earlier on, and prepare for the run. So that's it.
Excellent. So then this slide should be the run. It is a 10-kilometer run. There are 8 stations that you will see on the next map. The course terrain is a fairly hilly course. If you've not run Central Park, we're running backwards around the park, which is not kind of the normal way to go, but it's certainly a fine way to go. Depending on the day, it's going to be a hot, warm day. So be prepared, again, from a perspective of hydration. There are 8 stations at every single mile. There will be medical individuals at every single mile. And obviously at the finish line, we have all of what you could possibly need, from medical personnel to hydration to wet towels to massage therapists, chiropractors. This is an incredible finish for 4,000 athletes, so we're very excited about having you on this course. Next slide. So again, this depicts, you can see the yellow and red transition zones, and you'll be running south to 72nd Street across the west side of Manhattan. And again, this is unique that it's closed. There'll be barricades. There will be no cars. You'll enter the park. That's really our first aid station as you enter the park, and that's where Cliff Shot will be, as well as hydration. You'll run north, up around the north end of the park and come around. And at the 72nd Street transverse, you'll make a right-hand turn, and then you'll just be a little loop around that you'll have to go before hitting the finish line. But this is a spectacular, hilly, fun course to run. Next slide. So from my perspective in run safety, and then I'll ask Troy for any tidbits on the run, this is about being prepared. You need to have fun. Think about your nutrition on race day. Again, the day before activity, again, as Troy alluded to, and as I said also and reinforced, eat lightly, drink more salty foods, more salty drinks than anything else. Think about the bike gearing in transition, your helmet first, got to dismount where you're supposed to. And one real rule that we will abide by is you must give your chip back. At the end of the race, there will be people that will take the chips off your ankle, but if for any reason that you decide that you cannot continue the race and decide to leave the course, you must give a race official or a medical person your chip. We account for every single racer on that day, and if we're missing a racer, the first place that is looked for is in the water. And you can imagine the amount of resources that need to be taken to look for people in the water. Please give your chip back so that we know exactly where you are. If you have a problem, medical people will be all along the course. They're dressed in red. And as Troy also spoke about, family appreciation. You've committed your time. Your family's committed time to you. Appreciate them at the end. There's a family waiting area that's there for you. So appreciate them, because that's really what this racing is about. Troy, any tidbits on that?
Nope, I'm good.
Next slide. So for myself and Troy, and that's Joe Gilward, who helps us out also, good luck. I think it's going to be a great day. I think it's a great race, and we're basically available for any questions.
I haven't seen any questions come in yet, but anyone feel free to use the chat function or the Q&A function on your WebEx screen to submit any questions that you may have.
I can't imagine we've answered all the questions. There must be more.
I know. Oh, got a few coming in. Here we go. So we have one on any advice for posterior tibialis tendinitis, if I said that correctly?
Yep, sure, absolutely. So posterior tib tendinitis. Your posterior tibialis is a muscle that originates in your lower leg, kind of on the inner side of where your calf is, and it sends a tendon around the inner aspect of your ankle and inserts into your foot. That muscle and tendon are essential for normal walking and normal running. When you run and you hit, in theory, heel strike, your foot is very flexible to allow it to accommodate the surface that you're about to push off from. When you start to roll to midfoot to forefoot, that muscle itself acts, the tendon pulls around what we call the medial malleolus. That's the bone that you feel on the inner side of your ankle. It acts as a rope going around a pulley, and it locks your foot into a rigid structure. That allows you to push off. If you didn't have that functionality, you couldn't really walk. So that tendon, as it runs around the inner aspect of the ankle, can get irritated, a rope going around a pulley. So we're talking about inflammation. We're talking about what are corrective mechanisms. Well, one is treating your footwear to make sure that you've got some aspect of an arch support, a better supportive shoe that helps relieve some of the stress to that posterior tibialis tendonitis. Utilizing ice to help reduce some inflammation. We often prescribe anti-inflammatories. This is kind of, off-label and off the cuff, but, the bottle of Advil will tell you to take 2 Advil, every 4 to 6 hours. That's basically on the lower end of the spectrum. Normally it's 600 milligrams 3 times a day. That's the level, the entry level, which it becomes an anti-inflammatory. So if you have no medical problems, no contraindications, no bleeding ulcers, no heartburn, that's an appropriate dosing of ibuprofen. But certainly, as I have learned, and I think Troy, who's a few years behind me, is learning, that as we age, we lose lean body muscle mass, and nothing replaces resistance and strength training throughout your training cycle. It's very easy to go biking, it's very easy to go running, it's very easy to go swimming, but we lose sight of muscle strength. And one of the indicators usually with this is that there's some loss of strength in that posterior tibialis. So often we'll send people to physical therapy too to help with this, to help rebuild some of the strength. But the simple principles of reducing the inflammation, changing your footwear, and maybe getting to see a physical therapist could certainly help you get through that problem. I hope that answered that.
So our next question is relating to family members and spectators watching the race. First question is, where should family members go to see us race, and is there tracking available? So I can go ahead and answer this one for us, is that we will have the tracking available so that your family members and spectators can see where you're at along the course. This will be announced in our athlete guide and on our website as we get closer to the race. And so make sure you bug your athlete about making sure they get that information to you. And then where's the best places for them to spectate? Unfortunately, there's nowhere to spectate along the bike course, but you are able to watch athletes as they swim, walk along the seawall there. And then a really exciting place, once they come back and are out on the run, is across 72nd Street. Like we said earlier, 72nd Street is completely open and closed just for the athletes on race day, so that's always a big zone for spectators to watch. It's very exciting, as well as anywhere along the park in Central Park, as it is still open during the race. And then, what if it rains? Is the bike course dangerous? We actually put a lot of time and effort into making sure that all of the potholes and all of the road conditions are up to par and very safe for our athletes. It has happened before that it has rained on race day, so we definitely encourage athletes to keep it slow and keep it to a speed that you feel comfortable, but we do everything in our power to make sure that you are safe out there regardless of whatever race conditions do come up.
Alex, let me just address that for 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Don't worry about the weather, because there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. My biggest fear of one of the races, Ironman Lake Placid, was doing that in the rain. There's a descent that you can have in excess of 50 to 55 miles an hour, and I was panicked over that. And I wasted a lot of energy worrying about that. And yes, it did pour and rain, and it was a little bit more squirrely and dangerous. But I would say that in New York City, there's not a huge descent that you could achieve those speeds. If you've driven on that road, there are some joints to the road. There are metal grates that might be a little bit more slippery. So as Alexa said, I think you just have to plan appropriately. But my first statement of don't worry about the weather. We have that under control, and we will make sure that it is safe for you guys to race.
Okay, great. Dr. Klion, do you have any advice on avoiding Achilles tendonitis?
Again, you know, these are the classic pattern of overuse injuries. You can look at the training program and see where you might have gone awry. The same principles. This is a tendon, no different than the posterior tibialis. So the standard treatment of, you know, looking at the shoe wear, utilizing some ice, maybe taking a course of ibuprofen. Gentle stretching is always very helpful, and that can be done in two forms. One is active stretching, so I sit, I stretch, but you can do some passive stretching too, and that's in the form of what's referred to as a night split. Briefly, everybody sleeps kind of with their foot pointed, or what's called plantar flex, and in that position, your calf, your gastrocnemius and soleus, which make up the tendon of the Achilles, get contracted. If we can have you sleep with your foot kind of pointed up for the 6 hours, 8 hours, 9 hours that you sleep, passively that's going to be stretching it. And that can be really helpful if people have symptoms in the morning. I get out of bed and I feel like I'm 90 years old. My ankles are really stiff. Again, appropriate physical therapy is very helpful for this. And even sometimes wearing heels. Now, not every guy is going to wear 3-inch pumps, but you could certainly get heel lifts, gel inserts, and I would certainly put it on both sides so you're balanced. But getting a little bit of a heel tends to take some of the pressure off of those Achilles tendons.
All right, our next question is relating to wetsuits. I normally swim with a long wetsuit for ultra triathlons. I've never done this race. Is it too humid for long wetsuits, or is it better to judge on the day of?
I would say to you, I don't think it makes any difference whatsoever. You're going to be so fast in the swim, whether you're sleeveless. I mean, I would obviously wear a wetsuit, but I think it doesn't make any difference whatsoever.
Perfect. You mentioned you change your sneakers every few hundred miles. If you don't mark them or keep track, is there a way to know when it is a good time for a change?
Well, I would certainly say if you see the bottom surface starting to wear, that usually means you know, outlasted its life. So it's simple to write the date on your pair of sneakers, without a doubt. And certainly there are lots of programs that are out there right now that track your run, and you can certainly look at your cumulative mileage, you know, over a period of time.
Another couple questions relating to the swim. Is it a dive start, and is the swim restricted to freestyle? I can go ahead and answer that. You may see in some of the photos on our website athletes diving into the water. The dive start is actually only for the pro field and our elite amateur field. So everyone else is going to be required to do a simple jump and start to the race. And with regard to the freestyle, you're welcome to do any stroke that fits your, you know, fitness and whatnot, but with regards to, you know, laying on your back, or maybe, you know, you have the chance to rest on a surfboard, or, you know, rest on one of the jet skis, you're welcome to do that as well. Just nothing that's going to propel you forward if you do stop to rest. What do you recommend for increasing my bike speed? I feel like I have plateaued, but I also have some anxiety racing or biking fast on the roads.
I can take that one. So increasing bike speed, that's really a complex question, but the easiest thing that you can do to increase your bike speed, first of all, you address the fact that there's a confidence issue on the road. So road riding skills are something you develop by actually getting out there on the roads and being comfortable cornering and riding on the road and maintaining that proper balance on the bike. So you really only get that by riding on the road. So I would certainly recommend that at least once a week you try to get on your bike, the bike that you're going to race on, and get out there and ride at speeds that you feel that you may race at. So that's important. That'll build your confidence. To address the other question, how to build speed, well, there's no better way to build speed on the bike than by doing interval training. Interval training will boost your fitness. It'll boost your lactate threshold, your VO2 max, and it will really take your cycling to the next level. In other words, don't ride at the same speed all the time. Steady state training, while it's important, isn't something you should do all the time. Take 1 or 2 workouts a week on the bike and make them interval sessions. And it can be as simple as a set of 10 1-minute really hard efforts at 1-minute rest. That's a great workout to begin with. That will certainly increase your fitness. Or you can get a lot more complex with the program, use a power meter on the bike, and really dial in your training zones and train according to power if you'd like. But interval training, just in general terms, is your best way to improve your speed and incorporate that kind of hard work in your program once or twice per week.
All right, you mentioned earlier about the Navy SEAL rule of being at 40% of maximum endurance when you feel you can't go further and try to push on. But when should you actually stop?
That's a really good question. So my point in mentioning that was that we are limited more so by our mental abilities than we are by our physical abilities. So in other words, our bodies can go a lot further than you think. I don't want to recommend to anybody that you push beyond your pain limits. That's not a good idea, and I'm sure Dr. Klion would agree. But as far as our potential goes, we have a lot more potential than we give ourselves credit for. But when you do start feeling any undue discomfort or any pain, that's a clear indication that you need to slow down. Dr. Mark?
I totally agree with you. I mean, there are, as I said, my motto is pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. But pain is a subjective statement, Just because you feel crampy and, you don't feel like going on, I think that's your brain that's really speaking. But obviously, as I alluded to, if it hurts with every step that you're taking, then that's a clear warning sign that you should be stopping.
Okay. Since I bought my new sneakers, I feel pain in my legs in different areas than I'm used to. Is it related to the change, or is it simply due to the fact that I haven't trained seriously in months? Should I see a doctor regardless?
Well, I think if it's a different model of sneaker, and I know we always get caught in that, well, they just upgraded my model and they changed it a little bit, and gee, I wish I had my old sneakers. If it's a change in sneaker and you've seen a reputable person who has either videotaped, which is really the gold standard now, of videotape analysis to make sure that you're in a good neutral running position, if it's a new sneaker, then maybe I might think about going back to the old sneaker per se. But certainly if this is a dramatic change from the fact that you have not been working out, and this is now one of your first attempts at an Olympic distance try, this might just be your body's adaptation to it, and I just think you have to listen closely to your body. But if there's one specific, the outside of my knee is really bothering me every time I run, then that's maybe something that you should seek out a professional opinion about.
All right, and one of our last questions here is the question about just logistics. Talking about someone's coming into the city by train on Friday and leaving on Monday and asking about bike storage. So we do not have any bike storage for you over the duration of the weekend. The only time that we will have your bike is when you are required to check your bike in on Saturday between 2 p.m. and 9 p.m. the night before the race. You're welcome to leave your bike there. Everyone's required to check their bike in, so you're welcome to bring it in at any time during that time span. But then you will be required to pick up your bike by 2 p.m. The day of the race. So other than that, we don't have any storage. We do offer a bike check while you're picking up your packet at the expo, but other than that, we will not be able to kind of check on bikes or any storage at that point. And then I think that is wrapping us up. Everyone's saying good luck and thank you.
Yeah, excellent. I want to again thank Troy and thank you, Alexa, and thanks to all of the athletes. We will be at the expo. There will be a medical tent. If there are any last-minute questions, I will be there pretty much all weekend. Feel free to stop by, say that you heard us. I think we will be having another webinar, which will probably go over some of the same details that you might have gotten, but maybe 2 weeks out from the race, and we can go over tapering and some more nutritional aspects of this. We did this last year, and I think it was very well attended. But again, if there's any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to Troy or myself. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night, and good luck with your training.